Chapter 2. The Case Against Guilt, A Parent's Guide to Behavioral Genetics. When I was just a little girl, I asked my mother, "What will I be? Will I be pretty? Will I be rich?" Here's what she said to me. "Que sera, Sarah, whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours to see. Que sera, Sarah." Doris Day, the man who knew too much. Kids born today require food and shelter, just as they did 100,000 years ago. Meeting these basic needs is far easier than it once was. We buy at the store rather than hunt in the wild. As we've gotten better at providing food and shelter, however, we've also upped our standards of good parenting. Modern parents feel obligated to make many extra credit investments in their children's future. Their free time revolves around their children, preparing them, shuttling them around, and watching them from the bleachers. Why do parents kill themselves instead of taking my easy way out? Unlike a lot of expert recommendations, it is hard to deny that my approach would work as advertised. At least in the short run, parents would clearly be happier if they gave themselves a break. Moms and dads' central objection is that if they cut corners, they risk their children's future. Indeed, they often shudder when they hear my advice. Their heads fill with images of lazy parents fiddling while their oversized packs of barbaric children burn down Rome. We're going to see that these fears are mostly, if you'll pardon the expression, old wives' tales. You can do a lot less without risking your children's future, because children are far more resilient than we realize. Once upon a time, nature versus nurture was a matter of opinion, but now there are hard answers. Nature wins, especially in the long run. If your child had grown up in a very different family, or if you had been a very different parent, he probably would have turned out about the same. This may sound discouraging. No parent wants to hear that his sacrifices have been in vain. I insist, however, that the glass is more than half full. Do you think your kids will turn out all right? You probably should. Most eventually do. Well, if I'm telling you the truth about nature and nurture, you don't need to make great decisions to get kids you can be proud of. You don't have to live up to the exhausting standards of the supermom and superdad next door. Instead, you can raise your kids in the way that feels comfortable for you and stop worrying. They'll still turn out fine. How to tell nature from nurture. Patrick Friedman is one of the most exciting characters I've ever met. He's the grandson of Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman, known for his staunchly libertarian views, and the son of economist David Friedman, who makes Father Milton look like a socialist. At Patri's 2005 wedding, a year before Milton passed away, guests saw 3 generations of Friedmans side by side. All were short and hyper. All were brilliant, creative, and loved a good debate. None were religious. All were libertarians. All were obsessed with economics. Admittedly, only Milton and David became economics professors. But after working for Google's prediction markets project, Patri decided to bring his sire's libertarian economics to life by founding the Seasteading Institute, a think tank that explores the feasibility of floating city-states on the high seas. What should we think about the Friedmans' eerie family resemblances? We tend to see their physical similarity as hereditary. The first time you set your eyes on Patri, you'll hail the power of the Friedman genes. Elfin Jew begat another Elfin Jew. In contrast, we tend to see their psychological and behavioral similarity as proof of the power of parenting. The first time you argue with Patri, you'll probably imagine that he spent decades learning the family business over the dinner table. Patri is brilliant and hyper, economistic and libertarian, because he was raised that way, right? If you share these musings with Patri, however, he'll disagree. His parents divorced when he was a baby, and his dad lived in another state. How then did he come to his distinctive outlook? Patri tells me he's been this way as long as he can remember. He entered the family business long before he knew it was the family business. Perhaps Patri understates his family's influence. Once he was 8 or so, he started spending summers with his dad. Perhaps people who knew about his noblest grandfather treated Patri in subtly different yet life-altering ways. Still, Patri's story raises a red flag. We might draw the line between nature and nurture in the wrong place. What makes us so sure that we're good at telling the two apart? The naive reaction to these doubts is to carefully study lots of families. Alas, you can't get anywhere on the nature-nurture issue merely by looking at typical families, because the typical family seamlessly blends biology and upbringing. We normally share half of our siblings' genes, plus a childhood in the same home. As long as these two treatments are woven together, we'll never figure out what's going on. Intelligent bystanders' reaction is usually to split the difference and decree, both nature and nurture are important, or else declare the question insoluble. Fortunately, active researchers in this area aren't so quick to admit defeat. After they concede that nature and nurture seamlessly go together in the typical family, they retort that not all families are typical. The secret to unraveling the nature-nurture mystery is to study special kinds of families where there is a clear seam, or even a complete separation, between biology and parenting. From this standpoint, two kinds of families are special: families that adopt and families with twins. We can clearly learn a lot by looking at families that adopt. When a couple raises the child of a perfect stranger from birth, any family resemblance is probably due to nurture. If you've never even met your birth parents but resemble them anyway, the reason is probably nature. What about families with twins? At first glance, they have the same problem as regular families. They seamlessly blend biology and upbringing, making it impossible to tell the two apart. But there are two kinds of twins: identical and fraternal. Identical twins share all of their genes. They usually look so similar that strangers have trouble telling who's who. When people ask me how to tell my identical twin sons apart, I point out that one has a barely visible birthmark on his chin. Fraternal twins share only half of their genes, no more than ordinary siblings. So if identical twins resemble each other more than fraternal twins, the reason is probably nature. Not good enough for you? We can go to the next level by looking at twins who were separated and raised by different families. If identical twins raised apart are more similar than fraternal twins raised apart, the reason almost has to be nature. If twins raised together are more similar than twins raised apart, the reason almost has to be nurture. A few decades ago, twin and adoption methods were little more than neat ideas. Since then, hundreds of researchers have taken these neat ideas and run with them. The result is a new discipline: behavioral genetics, and an imposing stack of studies that use twin and adoption methods to settle the nature-nurture debate, trait by trait. What do these studies reveal? Most expect the middle-of-the-road answer that both nature and nurture are important. Indeed, most have trouble believing anything else. But believe it or not, twin and adoption studies do not support the middle-of-the-road answer. Identical twins are much more similar than fraternal twins, even when separated at birth, and their similarity often increases as they age. When adopted children are young, they moderately resemble their adopted family. By the time adoptees reach adulthood, however, this resemblance largely fades away. Taken together, there's a striking lesson. Nature matters a lot more than nurture, especially in the long run. Nature versus nurture, clarifying the question. Twin and adoption studies are powerful microscopes on the human condition. Before we start looking through the microscope, however, let's take the device apart and see how it works. Explaining variation. It is easy to devise examples where nurture matters tremendously. If you raise a child in a closet and make sure he never hears a word, he won't learn how to speak. It is equally easy to devise examples where nature is all-powerful. If a child gets 2 copies of the gene for Tay-Sachs disease, he'll almost surely die by the age of 5. How can nature or nurture matter more if either can make all the difference in the world? Researchers handle this issue by focusing on what's important in practice, instead of mere hypotheticals. They don't ask, what could make people different from each other? They ask, what does make people different from each other? They don't ask, how would this child have turned out if he were raised by wolves? They ask, how would this child have turned out if he were raised by one of the other families we interviewed? If an adoption study concludes that nurture doesn't matter for height, this means that existing parenting differences do not affect kids' height. If a twin study similarly reports that upbringing doesn't affect income after age 30, This doesn't mean that your dad can't hire you for double your market value, merely that such nepotism is vanishingly rare in the real world. Nurture has two distinct ways not to matter. One is simple, the other is subtle. The simple way is when height is completely out of parents' control. If nothing in the parental toolkit affects height, we won't find a nurture effect. The subtle way is when all parents affect height to the same degree. If every parent takes actions that raise her children's height by 4 inches, differences in parenting won't explain why some kids are taller than others. The same distinction applies if you say that nurture doesn't matter much. It could mean that parents only have small effects. It could mean that parents have similar effects. Notice, if your goal is to understand differences that we actually observe, it's important to specify where we actually look. Most twin and adoption studies focus on people raised in advanced Western countries in modern times. So if a study finds that nurture doesn't matter for height, this tells us that mixing up 2 babies at an American or a Swedish hospital will leave their adult stature unchanged. If a mix-up sent a Haitian baby to food-rich America and an America baby to hungry Haiti, the effect on height could be massive. From a social scientist's point of view, this is an important distinction. You can't look at families in the United States or Sweden, conclude that almost all are good enough to allow children to flourish, then infer the same about families in Haiti. From a parent's point of view, however, this distinction is rarely relevant. If you're reading this book, you probably live in the first world, or at least enjoy a first world standard of living. When you decide what kind of parent to be, you aren't wondering whether you should emigrate to Haiti to raise your children in dire poverty. Instead, you're weighing the pros and cons of the parenting styles used by people like you. If you discover that these styles are equally good for kids, you have the information you need. Nurture and environment are not the same. No 2 people have exactly the same environment. 2 children who live under one roof have different teachers and friends. They watch different TV programs and eat different foods. One has the top bunk, the other has the bottom bunk. One gets a spanking, the other gets a bedtime story. Most, but not all, eventually leave their childhood home. How then can researchers say that 2 kids were nurtured in the same way? The answer is that researchers equate nurtured in the same way with were raised by the same people. If parents' income, education, marital status, parenting philosophy, religion, school district, or favorite color affects their children, it counts as nurture. What doesn't count as nurture? Any feature of children's environment that varies despite the fact that they were raised by the same people. Researchers call such features unique environment or non-shared environment. But you could just as well say none of the above. Anything from peers, germs, and television to parental favoritism, dumb luck, and free will could qualify as unique environment. Unique environment is a provably powerful force. My first 2 children share all their genes. They've lived with my wife and me since their birth. Yet they're different. One twin is more argumentative, the other eager to please. One focuses on following the rules, the other on making friends. If we took the nature-nurture debate literally, the individuality of my sons, or any identical twins raised together, would be impossible. The solution to this paradox: instead of picturing a 2-way race between nature and nurture, picture a 3-way race between nature, also known as heredity and genes, nurture, also known as upbringing, family, parents, and shared family environment, and unique environment, also known as non-shared environment and none of the above. If you're studying height, for example, there are 3 questions to ask. First, how much height variation is due to genetic differences? Second, how much is due to differences in family environment? Third, how much is due to everything else? The fact that genes don't explain everything does not imply that family environment explains the rest. Nature and nurture, direct versus indirect effects. Twin and adoption studies are great ways to distinguish nature from nurture. However, they rarely help us distinguish different kinds of nature or different kinds of nurture. Instead, they bundle all direct and indirect effects together. If researchers report that genes affect income, for example, The reason might be that genes matter for intelligence, and intelligence matters for income. It could just as easily mean that genes matter for looks, and looks matter for income. There doesn't need to be an income gene. Similarly, when researchers report that nurture matters for religion, the reason might be that parents instill religious values. Yet it could just as easily mean that parents control religious education, which in turn instills religious values. Since researchers bundle together direct and indirect effects, their results are a lot stronger than they look. Suppose an adoption study finds that nurture doesn't influence smoking. A parent could not reasonably object, right, but since peers influence smoking and parents influence peers, I still matter. The flaw in this argument is that a normal adoption study includes any and all indirect effects. If the parents influence peers, peers influence smoking channel worked, then an adoption study would report that parents matter. The same goes for neighborhoods. If parents choose their neighborhood, and neighborhoods affect kids' drinking or college attendance, then a twin study would conclude that nurture matters for drinking and college. So remember, researchers' failure to detect an effect doesn't just undermine simple stories of parental influence, it throws cold water on whatever stories you might propose. Measuring nature and nurture effects. It's easy to understand what it means for nature or nurture to have zero effect. What does it mean, though, for nature or nurture effects to be small or large? The clearest measures come from a thought experiment I call switched at birth. Imagine you have an identical twin, but there's a mix-up at the hospital. A nurse accidentally switches your twin with another family's baby. You and the stranger's baby grow up with your biological parents. Your twin grows up with the stranger's. Decades later, the hospital discovers its mistake and arranges a meeting between you, your identical twin, and your accidentally adopted sibling. To measure the effect of nature, just answer this question. Suppose you're higher on some trait, height, intelligence, income, conservatism, you name it, than 80% of your peers. How high on this trait should you expect your twin from switched at birth to be? To measure the effect of nurture, just answer this question. Suppose you're higher on some trait, height, intelligence, income, conservatism, you name it, than 80% of your peers. How high on this trait should you expect your adopted sibling from switched at birth to be? Most twin and adoption studies report enough information to measure both effects. If you're curious about the math, see the appendix on where the nature-nurture effect sizes come from. Intuitively, if nature didn't matter at all, you would expect your separated twin to be average, at the 50th percentile. If nature were destiny, you would expect your separated twin to match you at the 80th percentile. You'd both be higher in the trait than 4 out of 5 peers. Similarly, if nurture didn't matter at all, you would expect your adopted sibling to be average. If nurture were destiny, you would expect your adopted sibling to be at the 80th percentile, just like you. I'm going to use switched at birth's measures of nature and nurture over and over. Once we get to specific twin and adoption studies, I'll usually tell you their precise predictions about your separated twin or adopted sibling. As shorthand, if your counterpart in the thought experiment is in the 51st through 55th percentiles, I'll call that a small effect. If he's in the 56th through 65th percentiles, I'll call that a moderate effect. Anything more, I'll call large. The parental wish list. Can parents make their dreams come true? The children must be molded, shaped, and taught, that life's a looming battle to be faced and fought. Mary Poppins. Parents are supposed to love their children unconditionally, but that doesn't stop them from having an extensive wish list for the next generation. Some parents map out their kids' future in great detail. You will go to Harvard, become a cardiologist, marry a nice Jewish girl, and live in the house across the street. You're probably much more accepting, but you'd still prefer your kids to become healthy, smart, happy, successful, virtuous adults who share your values and appreciate what you've done for them. And if things don't pan out, even the most accepting parents wonder, where did I go wrong? The underlying assumption is that parents have the power to grant their own wishes. Do they? How much influence do parents really have over their children's traits? To answer these questions, I now climb upon the shoulders of giants, the hundreds of researchers, past and present, who have used twin and adoption methods to unlock the secrets of nature and nurture. Researchers have carefully studied every entry on the typical parent's wish list. It's time to confront their evidence, wish by wish. Wish-1 Health. My mom is a longtime anti-smoking crusader. When I was growing up in Los Angeles, she always requested the non-smoking section, even if she knew quite well that the restaurant didn't have one. My mother was so opposed to smoking that she offered her kids a cash prize, payable on our 21st birthdays, if we stayed away from tobacco. I never smoked, and my mom paid up. Yet to be honest, the prize was overkill. Smoking disgusted me from an early age. While my mom tried to shape my behavior and got the results she wanted, that hardly shows that her bribe worked. The same goes for a long list of health habits that parents struggle to instill. Parents pressure their kids to eat right, get fresh air and exercise, brush their teeth, and stay away from tobacco and drugs. Part of parents' motivation is to protect their kids' current health, but the typical kid is too full of life to expect much immediate payoff. The main rationale for health-related nagging is to instill healthy habits that last a lifetime. My parents put strict limits on sweets, even though I was a skinny kid with perfect teeth. However harmless and tasty candy might seem, they weren't going to let me develop bad eating habits that would hurt me when I grew up. If you take parents' rhetoric literally, there are strong implications. For example, if health nagging really works, then parents should affect how long their children live. If you influence your child's decision to smoke, and smoking affects lifespan, it follows that your child's lifespan is partly under your control. If parents want to convince themselves that their efforts pay off, it won't be hard. Long life runs in families. But there are two explanations for family resemblance in health, just as there are two explanations for family resemblance in anything. Upbringing is one, heredity is the other. When medical researchers use twin studies to weigh the importance of these competing explanations, nurture turns out to be far less important than parents think. Parents don't affect life expectancy. Major twin studies find no influence of family environment on lifespan. One looked at almost 3,000 pairs of Danish twins born between 1870 and 1900. By the time the study was conducted in 1994, virtually all of the twins were dead, so researchers could easily compare the longevity of identical versus fraternal twins. They found moderate genetic effects. If you lived longer than 80% of the population, you could expect your separated identical twin to live longer than 58% of us. Yet the Danish twin study found no evidence for an impact of shared family environment. Growing up in the same home, being nagged by the same people about the same things, does not make your life expectancy more alike. Another study looked at the mortality of about 9,000 Swedish twins born between 1886 and 1925. Since the Swedish sample was younger, some of the subjects were still alive. The goal of the study was to study twins' probability of surviving to a given age. The Swedish twin study found strong genetic effects, especially for males, and zero effect of upbringing. Parents have little or no effect on overall health. There's more to health than staying alive. Do parents make their children's years healthier, even if they don't make them longer? Probably not. Researchers have examined twins' objective health, what particular health problems they've had, and subjective health, how healthy they say they feel. A study of over 3,000 elderly Danish twins found moderate effects of heredity on hospitalizations and self-ER-reported health, but no effects of family environment. Another team of researchers looked at about 2,500 Swedish twins and found moderate genetic effects on self-rated health, but small or non-existent nurture effects. A smaller study of older female Finnish twins found moderate effects of upbringing on self-rated health, but no effect of upbringing on health ratings based on doctors' examinations. The most notable exception comes from the Swedish adoption/twin study of aging. Researchers studied over 700 twin pairs, about half raised apart. For respondents 70 and older, They found a moderate to large nurture effect on objective health. If you were at the 80th percentile of objective health, you could expect your adopted sibling to be at the 65th percentile. For all younger groups, however, the nurture effect was 0. Parents don't affect height, weight, or teeth. We all want our kids to grow up to be tall and fit, with sparkling white teeth. Most of us try to make these wishes come true. We push healthy foods, limit sweets, encourage exercise, and smell our kids' breath to make sure they use toothpaste. Parents probably recognize that genes play a role, but we clearly think we make a difference. Otherwise, what's the point of telling your kids how big and strong they'll be if they eat their vegetables? In reality, genes strongly influence both height and weight, while upbringing influences neither. In the Swedish adoption twin study of aging, twins raised together were about as similar in height and weight as twins raised apart, and identical twins were about twice as similar as fraternal twins, both strong signs that nature matters and nurture doesn't. Suppose you're 6 inches taller than average and 20 pounds overweight. Expect your separated identical twin to be 5 inches taller than average and 15 pounds overweight, and your adopted sibling to be perfectly average. A major survey article on the genetics of obesity confirms the power of nature and the impotence of nurture. Parents may not even affect the weight of young children, though one study finds a small family effect for girls in their tweens. If it seems hard to believe that parents are this powerless, remember the old saying that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. It's a big pain to make a picky eater clean his plate, or keep South Park's Eric Cartman on a low-carb diet. And if parents refuse their kids the food they crave, they'll find it somewhere else. What about teeth? Surely parents' commitment to brushing, flossing, and regular checkups has to matter. A major study of adult Swedish twins looked at gingivitis, periodontal disease, and complete tooth loss. All 3 conditions showed moderate genetic influence. Family environment, in contrast, mattered only for the rare problem of losing all your teeth. Parents might have a small effect on smoking, drinking, and drug problems. I understand why my mom paid me not to smoke. I don't want my kids to smoke either. I don't care whether drugs are legal or not, I don't want my kids to use them. When relatives give my 7-year-olds a little beer, it irks me. Still, the question remains, how much can I as a parent do about it? When I bite my tongue and let my kids take a sip of alcohol, do I risk their future? The answers from twin and adoption research aren't completely one-sided. Some conclude that nature fully explains why smoking, drinking, and drug use run in families. A study of over 3,000 male twins from the Vietnam-era twin registry found almost no family influence on nicotine and alcohol dependence. Another study of the same group of twins found that nurture mattered for regular use of marijuana, but not amphetamines, cocaine, or sedatives. A study of Australian twins found that family environment made almost no difference for alcoholism. Researchers using the Virginia 30,000 sample, a massive study of Virginian twins and their families, concluded that being raised by smokers makes you a little less likely to share their vice. Maybe cigarettes are a lame way to rebel against parents who smoke. But other researchers find that nurture plays a role as well. One team studied the tobacco, alcohol, and drug use of about 1,017 and 18-year-olds from the Minnesota Twin Family Study. They found moderate family effects for boys and large family effects for girls. A couple of other studies conclude that parents don't affect drinking, but siblings do. One looked at about 1,000 adoptees and their families and found that adoptees drank like their adopted siblings, but not like their adopted parents. Another study of over 1,000 Koreans adopted by American families found that children raised by mothers who never drank alcohol were almost 20 percentage points more likely to never drink themselves. What's a parent to think? You should put more stock in the larger studies that find small or non-existent nurture effects. If you have paternalism to spare, though, you might as well try to keep your kids off tobacco, alcohol, and drugs. You probably won't change your child, but there's an outside chance that you'll make a big difference. Wish #2, intelligence. New parents get excited by the faintest signs of their baby's intelligence. She could crawl, use a spoon, and say no before she was one. By the time they're toddlers, we're furtively comparing our kids' brain power to their playmates and struggling to give our offspring an edge with books, educational videos, museum trips, and tutors. If our child does poorly in school, we comfort ourselves with the thought that he just needs to apply himself. We care so much about our kids' intelligence that we try to increase it prenatally. One misreported study about the Mozart effect led moms to play the classics for babies and fetuses alike. However, a large scientific literature finds that parents have little or no long-run effect on their children's intelligence. Separated twin studies, regular twin studies, and adoption studies all point in the same direction. The Minnesota study of twins reared apart reunited almost 100 separated identical twins and triplets and gave them 2 standard IQ tests. It found large effects of genes on adult intelligence. If you did better than 80% of the population on both tests, you should expect your separated identical twin to do better than 72% on one test and 74% on the other. In contrast, when researchers compared the reared-apart twins to a control group of reared-together twins, the effect of nurture was barely detectable. If you did better than 80% of the population on both tests, you should expect your adopted sibling from switched at birth to do better than 56% on one test and just 50% on the other. The Swedish adoption twin study of aging studied the intelligence of about 150 pairs of middle-aged and elderly twins. Some of these twins were identical, some fraternal. About half were raised apart, half together. Researchers individually administered a 4-hour test of spatial and verbal intelligence, memory, and processing speed to each twin. They found an even larger effect of genes on intelligence than the Minnesota study, and confirmed the irrelevance of upbringing for adult intelligence. Growing up in the same family does not contribute to similarity in cognitive abilities later in life. Another team of researchers tested about 1,600 reared-together adult twins from the Dutch Twin Registry. Identical twins got extremely similar scores on a standard IQ test, and the similarity between fraternal twins was about half as strong, implying a big effect of genes and no effect of upbringing. In the switched at birth experiment, if you were smarter than 80% of the population, you should expect your separated twin to be smarter than 76%, but your adopted sibling to be perfectly average. In 1975, the Colorado Adoption Project began studying 245 adopted babies, their birth mothers, and their adoptive parents. It also set up a control group of 245 comparable babies being raised by their biological parents. By the age of 12, adoptees raised in high IQ homes were no smarter than those raised in average homes. The researchers double-checked this result 4 years later and found the same thing. The Texas Adoption Project, which spent decades studying over 300 adoptees and the families that adopted them, also found no effect of upbringing on the IQs of late adolescents. From a parent's point of view, these are strong results. Today's typical parents strive to mentally stimulate their children and struggle to protect their brains from being turned to mush by television and video games. Yet by adulthood, the fruit of parents' labor is practically invisible. Children who grew up in enriched homes are no smarter than they would have been if they'd grown up in average homes. Wish #3, happiness. Good parents want to make their children happy. In the short run, they often succeed. If I want to put big grins on my sons' faces, I buy them ice cream. Works every time. But most parents are more ambitious. They believe that if they raise their children in the right way, they'll grow up to be happy adults. Maybe the recipe is unconditional love. Maybe it's daily sermons about gratitude and how much harder life was when I was a kid. Parents differ on the best approach, but agree that parenting makes a big difference for the happiness of the next generation. Parents grossly overestimate their influence. The Minnesota Twin Registry gave personality tests to over 1,300 pairs of adult twins raised together. Fraternal twins' happiness resemblance was barely perceptible. If you're happier than 80% of people, your fraternal twin will typically be happier than 53%. If all of this were due to nurture, it wouldn't be much. On closer look, though, the credit belongs to nature, not nurture. Identical twins were far more similar in their happiness than fraternal twins, leaving no room for nurture effects. One of the main problems with happiness tests is that the subject might be having a bad day or a bad year. To deal with this concern, the Minnesota twin study waited about a decade, then retested. As expected, the research team found that happiness is fairly stable over time. Humans have a happiness set point to which they gravitate. The researchers were amazed, however, to discover that people are as similar to their identical twin a decade ago as they are to themselves a decade ago. The implication, nearly 100% of the variation in the happiness set point seems to be due to individual differences in genetic makeup. The most striking evidence on nature, nurture, and happiness comes from the Minnesota study of twins reared apart. Twins raised apart were more alike in happiness than twins raised together. If you're happier than 4 out of 5 people, expect your separated identical twin to be happier than 67% of us. If the identical Pollyanna twins were separated at birth, both sets of parents would probably claim responsibility for their daughter's happiness, and they'd both be wrong. The same goes for self-esteem. The single most impressive study interviewed almost 8,000 twins from the Virginia Twin Registry and found zero effect of parenting on self-esteem for both men and women. Parents try to build their kids up, but science backs the slogan that self-esteem comes from within. Finally, what about unhappiness? We're quicker to blame our parents for our misery than thank them for our joy. But further research using the Minnesota Twin Registry concludes that nurture is equally irrelevant for both. The twins' personality test measured many different ways to feel bad: nervous, upset, guilty, mistreated, betrayed, angry, vindictive, and so on. Upbringing didn't matter. By the time you're an adult, your parents' past mistakes are not the reason for your present unhappiness. Parents like to think they're giving their children the love and support they need to become happy adults. Unhappy adults like to blame their problems on their parents' lack of love and support. According to the best evidence, however, both groups are wrong. Nature isn't the sole author of our happiness, but nurture barely gets a word in. If you just can't believe this, I know where you're coming from. It's easy to recall times when your mom or dad made you angry or sad. But if you'd grown up with a very different family, you'd still have a Rolodex of stories about how your parents hurt your feelings. In what sense, then, are your parents the reason for the way you feel today? You might as well just blame life. #4. Success. Do you know, Mother, I shall have our children educated just like Lucy. Bring them up among honest country folks for freshness, send them to Italy for subtlety, and then, not till then, let them come to London. I don't believe in these London educations." He broke off, remembering that he had had one himself. E.M. Forster, A Room with a View. Strangers often advise you to follow your dreams, but parents are more likely to tell you to get your head out of the clouds. Doing what you love is all well and good, but don't you want to make something out of your life? To get ahead? Parents might add that in the long run, you'll be happier if you take their advice. Being a successful lawyer is more fun than being a failed actor. I'm not taking sides here. My point is merely that parents want their children to be successful, and that doesn't just mean follow your bliss. Instead, success roughly equals high income and a fancy degree. These are the kind of accomplishments parents can brag about to their friends, as in my son, the doctor. Many parents obsess over their children's success. They don't just help them a little with their homework. They plan out their lives, beginning with elite preschools, and use any chance they get to give their kids a leg up. Successful parents have successful kids. The reason, most parents assume, is that the winners had more help from mom and dad. Twin and adoption studies say almost the opposite. Successful parents may give their kids a small edge, but heredity is much more important. Kids literally inherit educational and financial success from their parents. The most influential gift that parents give their children is not money, connections, or help with their homework, but the right stuff. Parents have little effect on how much school their kids get. Parents feel an intense obligation to be involved with their kids' education. Does their involvement yield fruit? Most twin and adoption studies respond slightly. A few say yes for earlier generations. The rest give a flat-out no. In 1955, Harry Holt, an Oregon businessman, and his wife Bertha adopted 8 Korean orphans. Soon they set up a charity to help other Americans adopt disadvantaged Koreans. The adopting families were unusually diverse. To be eligible, couples had to be married for at least 3 years, 25 to 45 years old, with no more than 4 children, and a minimum income just 25% above the poverty line. In 2004-2005, economist Bruce Sacerdote tracked down over 1,600 of the Korean adoptees and their adopting families to see how they turned out. Nurture influenced the Koreans' educational success. More educated moms and fewer siblings both helped, but only slightly. If the mother had an extra year of education, the child finished 5 extra weeks of education and was 2 percentage points more likely to graduate from college. For every extra sibling, the adoptee finished 6 fewer weeks of education and was 3 percentage points less likely to graduate from college. The Korean adoption study is most remarkable, though, for what it failed to find. Rich parents routinely try to give their kids an edge by moving to good school districts, hiring tutors, and paying tuition for fancy schools. Yet neither family income nor neighborhood income increased adoptees' academic success. If you ever thought it unfair for rich parents to buy their children's way through school, be at peace. Apparently, they don't get what they pay for. Another major study of over 2,000 Swedish adoptees plus their adoptive and birth parents got almost the same results. The main difference? In Sweden, dads matter more, moms matter less. If the dad who raised you had 1 more year of education, you got 5 more weeks. If he finished college, you were 10 percentage points more likely to do the same. The only clear effect of maternal education, in contrast, was that kids were 10 percentage points more likely to finish college if their adopted moms did the same. Twin studies also find small effects of nurture on education. The most remarkable examined about 2,000 pairs of American twins who served in World War II, plus their grown children. The results? Genes matter a lot for educational success. If you're more educated than 4 out of 5 people, you can expect your separated identical twin to be more educated than 3 out of 4. Upbringing makes little difference. Only 2 nurture effects stand out in the veteran twins study. First, if your father is a professional or manager instead of an unskilled worker, you typically complete 1 more year of education. Second, every extra sibling depresses your educational achievement by 7 weeks. Researchers who looked at about 2,500 Australian twins confirmed these results. Identical twins' educational success is markedly more similar than fraternal twins. Nurture does matter, but only slightly. If either parent gets an extra year of education, you get 4 or 5 extra weeks. If your family has an extra kid, you complete 3 fewer weeks. While twin and adoption studies usually find that your family has a small effect on how far you get in school, exceptions exist. Some twin research reports that upbringing used to be more important and continues to be more important for women. An early study of Norwegian twins found strong family effects for female twins born before 1961 and male twins born before 1940. During the pre-war era, if you had 1 extra year of education, you could expect your adopted sibling to have about 6 extra months. Researchers using the Minnesota Twin Family Registry and the Finnish Twin Cohort Study similarly found moderate to large nurture effects for Americans and Finns born between 1936 and 1955. Other twin researchers conclude that children's families have no long-run effect on educational success. Their reasoning? Husbands and wives don't pair up randomly. Married couples usually have similar levels of education, intelligence, and other genetically influenced traits. The catchphrase is assortative mating. The slightly yucky implication is that most of us are the fruit of mild incest. Since married couples are somewhat genetically similar, siblings share more than half their genes. Implication: fraternal twins are genetically closer to identical twins than we thought, so standard twin methods underestimate nature and overestimate nurture. When researchers fix this flaw, educational nurture effects go away. One team combined thousands of observations from earlier studies of spouses, parents, their children, siblings, and twins. After adjusting for spouses' educational similarity, it found that family environment has no effect on how far you get in school. A more recent study of Australian twins reports moderate nurture effects on education, assuming people marry at random. Once the researchers discard this unrealistic assumption, nurture effects vanish for both men and women, even those born in the first half of the 20th century. Parents have no effect on grades. All of the twin and adoption studies so far focus on years of education and college graduation. When parents help with homework, though, maybe their goal is to help their kids learn more or get better grades. Do they succeed? While this question has received less attention, the signs point to no. An early study of about 500 Australian twins reported little or no effect of upbringing on college-bound students' knowledge of arts, science, English, geography, math, or biology. A research team investigating the attitudes of almost 700 Canadian twins discovered that family had no effect on high school seniors' GPA. The most impressive evidence, however, comes from the U.S.-based National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health, a nationally representative survey of 7th through 12th graders living in the same household. The subjects were a mix of identical twins, fraternal twins, siblings, half-siblings, cousins, and non-relatives, about 1,700 kids in all. Genes had a strong effect on grades. If you're at the 80th percentile of your class, expect the identical twin you never met to be at the 71st. Parental effects, in contrast, were literally invisible. The GPAs of unrelated kids raised together were no more similar than strangers. The lesson: if you've ever felt angry about parents who do their kids' homework for them, you can stop. In the long run, these parents aren't inflating their kids' grades. As far as we can tell, they're either wasting their time or reliving their youth. Parents have little or no effect on how much money their kids make when they grow up. Most parents feel secondhand greed, or to be polite, they want their kids to be financially successful. True, more parents nag their kids to do well in school than to make a lot of money. Yet a lot of educational nagging is income nagging in disguise. Think about how parents react when their children choose a major. You want your kid to study medicine or law, not French poetry or sociology. Parents who want their kids to get ahead encourage education, but that's only part of a bigger strategy. You're also supposed to teach your child the value of $1, an honest day's work, teamwork, initiative, and ambition. No matter what your income is, you've got something to stress about. If you don't have money, you stress about the advantages you can't give your children. How will they get ahead without the right connections? If you do have money, you stress about giving your kids too many advantages. If you spoil them, won't it kill their drive and self-reliance? All this fretting is much ado about nothing. Yes, wealth and poverty run in families. According to twin and adoption studies, however, the main reason is not upbringing, but heredity. Nurture has even less effect on income than on education. In Sacerdote's Korean adoption study, biological children from richer families grew up to have much higher incomes, but adoptees raised in the same families did not. The results are strong to the point of shocking. The income of the family you grew up with has literally no effect on your financial success. Korean adoptees raised by the poorest families have the same average income as adoptees raised by the richest families. While adoptees' moms have a small effect on their education, that extra education fails to pay off in the job market. Growing up in a rich neighborhood is equally impotent. Small families boost kids' incomes, but the effect is tiny. Every sibling depresses your adult income by about 4%. The Swedish adoption study mentioned earlier finds small effects on income rather than no effects at all. Being raised by a dad with 10% higher earnings causes you to earn 1% more when you grow up. Twin studies also find small to zero effects of nurture on financial success. Identical twins' incomes are much more similar than fraternal twins. A recent working paper looks at over 5,000 men from the Swedish twin registry born between 1926 and 1958. Identical twins turn out to be almost exactly twice as similar in labor incomes as fraternal twins. Precisely what you would expect if family resemblance were purely hereditary. A study of over 2,000 Australian twins finds the same thing. Contrary evidence. In the U.S. Twinsburg study, which looks at about 400 American male twins, nurture matters a bit more, and nature matters a bit less. If you earn more than 80% of your peers, your adopted sibling can expect to earn more than 55%. A study of American full and half siblings using the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, NLSY, implies an even more modest effect. The adopted sibling is expected to have a higher income than 53% of the population. You want your kids to succeed, but how much do you really help them? According to twin and adoption studies, not much. If your family is legally qualified to adopt, your parenting is good enough to allow your child to realize his potential. Whether he takes advantage of these opportunities is largely up to him. #5 Character. Okay, so maybe I am lazy, but it's not really my fault. I've been lazy ever since I was a little kid, and if someone had caught it early on, maybe I wouldn't be the way I am now. Jeff Kinney, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Dog Days. A Boy Named Sue is one of Johnny Cash's most famous songs, and certainly his funniest. In it, a deadbeat dad adds insult to injury. Before he abandons his son, he names him Sue. The name gives Sue a lifetime of grief, and he vows revenge. Years later, he finally bumps into his dad in a Gatlinburg bar. Father and son have a battle royal, then reach for their guns. The younger man's a little quicker. Before Sue can commit patricide, however, his father reveals his true motive. He didn't name him Sue out of cruelty. He did it to build his son's character. And it worked. And he said, "Son, this world is rough. And if a man's gonna make it, he's gotta be tough. And I knew I wouldn't be there to help you along. So I give you that name and I said goodbye. I knew you'd have to get tough or die. And it's the name that helped to make you strong." Sue's almost convinced. He spares his dad's life and calls him Pa, but he's not convinced enough to put his own son through the same ordeal. And if I ever have a son, I think I'm going to name him Bill or George, any damn thing but Sue. Most parents aren't as ruthless as Sue's father, but his motive should be familiar. We want our children to grow up to be men and women of substance, of character. Like Sue's dad, we want our children to be strong and determined, but that's only the beginning. We also want our kids to be hardworking, diligent, honest, polite, cooperative, and kind. And we certainly don't want them to become common criminals. If we have to occasionally hurt their feelings to raise them right, so be it. When you tell parents that they overestimate their influence, they often retreat to the bunker of character. Maybe I can't affect his IQ or his income, but I can control whether he grows up to be a decent person. For health, intelligence, happiness, or success, most parents eventually learn some modesty. For character, they're practically parental determinists. If you raise your children right, they will grow up to be good people, and if they turn out bad, the reason must be that you raised them wrong. Is there any truth to this? Is character a genuine exception to the rule that nurture doesn't matter much? Parents have little or no effect on conscientiousness or agreeableness. To answer, we need plausible ways to measure character. Luckily for us, personality psychologists have been studying human personality for decades, so plausible measures of character already exist. According to most psychologists, personality traits fall under 5 big umbrellas: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. If you make a list of the traits that almost all parents want to instill — hardworking, diligent, honest, polite, cooperative, kind, and so on — they fall under just 2 of the psychologists' umbrellas: conscientiousness and agreeableness. One good way to test for parental influence on character is to use twin and adoption methods to figure out where conscientiousness and agreeableness come from. Personality psychologists have been there and done that. Some find small effects of family environment on character. The rest find none at all. Good kids do tend to come from good families. Yet contrary to what almost everyone thinks, the overarching reason is heredity, not upbringing. Sue had strength and determination because he inherited them from his strong-willed father, not because his girly name made him strong. Hillary Clinton outraged many people by insisting, "It takes a village to raise a child." Her offense was not to deny the importance of parents, but to hint that good parenting is not enough. The results from twin and adoption studies are more outrageous. You may be tempted to dismiss them out of hand, but before you do, how about a tour of the evidence? One of the earliest studies of nature, nurture, and character used the Swedish adoption twin study of aging. Researchers gave personality tests to 500 reared-apart twins and 600 reared-together twins and found small to moderate nurture effects. Suppose you're higher on conscientiousness and agreeableness than 80% of the population. According to the Swedish twin study, you should expect your adopted sibling to be more conscientious than 54% of the population and more agreeable than 57%. A survey article published in Science a year later reported similar nurture effects for conscientiousness, but smaller effects for agreeableness. More recent twin research finds even smaller effects of parenting on character. One team looked at almost 2,000 German twins. While most personality research simply asks people to describe themselves, the German twin study got 3 perspectives on each subject: a self-report, plus 2 independent reports by friends or other close acquaintances. When researchers combined all this information, they found unusually large effects of nature on conscientiousness and agreeableness, and no effect of nurture. Studies of 1,600 American twins and 600 Canadian twins also found that upbringing did not affect character. If you're skeptical about self-reporting, you might prefer the Swedish approach. Sweden has universal military service. After high school graduation, a professional psychologist reviews each recruit's dossier and interviews him to rate the young man's emotional stability, persistence, his ability to function in a group, and his ability to take initiatives. Researchers often call these traits non-cognitive skill, but they sound a lot like character. Since Sweden keeps excellent twin records, we can use psychologists' ratings to understand where character comes from. As usual, genes play a serious role. Identical twins are much more alike in character than fraternal twins. Upbringing, in contrast, only has a small effect. If you had more character than 80% of Swedish recruits, you should expect your adopted sibling to have more than 54%. In 2005, leading psychologist John Lowland took a comprehensive look at family studies of personality. Character does run in families. If your parents were higher in conscientiousness and agreeableness than 80% of the population, you're typically more conscientious than 53% of us, and more agreeable than 54%. However, the resemblance is about equally strong when you compare adoptees to their biological parents, and virtually non-existent when you compare adoptees to the parents who raised them. Heredity wins again. Parents have little or no effect on criminal behavior. Faced with all this evidence, parents might protest, "I'm not trying to turn my kid into a saint. I'm just trying to raise a law-abiding member of society." As Bart Simpson told Judge Constance Harm, "Your Honor, it's not easy being my parents. I'm always screwing up in school and getting in trouble with the law. But if I grow up to be a halfway decent person, I know it will be because of my mom and dad." Bart's not alone. Most of us think that good parenting can keep kids from turning into common criminals. But how much effect on criminality do parents really have? As usual, there are twin and adoption studies to enlighten us. In 1984, Science published a study of almost 15,000 Danish adoptees, age 15 or older, their adoptive parents, and their birth parents. Thanks to Denmark's careful record-keeping, the researchers knew whether any of the people in their study had criminal convictions. Since few female adoptees had legal problems, the study focused on males, with striking results. As long as the adoptees' biological parents were law-abiding, their adoptive parents made little difference. 13.5% of adoptees with law-abiding biological and adoptive parents got convicted of something, versus 14.7% with law-abiding biological parents and criminal adoptive parents. If the adoptees' biological parents were criminal, however, upbringing mattered. 20% of adoptees with law-breaking biological and law-abiding adoptive parents got convicted versus 24.5% with law-breaking biological and adoptive parents. Criminal environments do bring out criminal tendencies. Still, as long as the biological parents were law-abiding, family environment made little difference. In 2002, a study of antisocial behavior in almost 7,000 Virginian twins, born since 1918, found a small nurture effect for adult males and no nurture effect for adult females. The same year, a major review of 51 twin and adoption studies reported small nurture effects for antisocial attitudes and behavior. For outright criminality, however, heredity was the sole cause of family resemblance. The lesson? Even if your standards are low, instilling character is hard. Genes are the main reason criminal behavior runs in families. Contrary to popular opinion, good upbringing is not enough to steer a child away from a life of crime. If that depresses you, there are two sources of comfort. First, as long as you and your spouse are law-abiding, it's good news, because non-criminality is hereditary too. Second, most children of criminals don't become criminals. In the Danish adoption study, over 3/4 of the boys born of and raised by people with criminal convictions weren't convicted themselves. You don't have to be hopeful about parenting to be hopeful about your children's future. Wish#6 Values. Babies, chum, tiny, dimpled, fleshy mirrors of our usness that we parents hurl into the future like leathery footballs of hope. And you've got to get a good spiral on that baby, or evil will make an interception. The tick. Character isn't controversial. Almost all parents want their kids to be hardworking, honest, kind, and so on. Yet few parents stop there. Most of us also try to impart controversial values. We teach our children to see the world as we do, even if others say our lessons are wrong or wicked. When your side does it, it's education. When other sides do it, it's brainwashing. Religion is the most obvious example. Whatever your religious view, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Zoroastrian, or atheist, I bet you want your kids to believe as you do. In fact, I bet you want your kids to accept not just your religion, but your interpretation of it. If you're a liberal Jew, you don't want your child to join an ultra-Orthodox synagogue. In politics, there's a little more room for independent thought, but less than we care to admit. If you're a moderate Democrat, you want your kids to be moderate Democrats too. You don't want Marxist sons who denounce your bourgeois compromises, or Republican daughters who tell you what Ann Coulter said. When controversy erupts, parents want their children on their side. Religion and politics are only the beginning. Some parents teach traditional values, others call for open-mindedness and tolerance. Some tell their children to have faith, others praise the power of critical thinking. Some parents preach mercy, others demand an eye for an eye. Indeed, some parents raise their children to be fruitful and multiply. Others tell them that we need to limit our numbers, lest we destroy the planet. You know where I stand on the last issue, but I'm not bringing up controversies to take a side. My task isn't to distinguish good education from evil brainwashing. I am simply observing that parents of all stripes want their kids to share their values and believe they can cause this to happen. Then I ask my standard question: is this widespread belief true? When parents try to educate, brainwash their kids, do their lessons stick? As usual, the fact that we often share our parents' values does not prove that upbringing matters. The similarity could be hereditary. If genes affect health, intelligence, happiness, success, and character, why not values? To measure parents' influence, we must once again defer to twin and adoption studies. They find that contrary to the Jesuit motto, "Give me a child until he is 7 and I will give you the man," the effect of upbringing on values is superficial. If you want your children's lip service, parenting can probably get it for you. But if you want to win your children's hearts and minds, twin and adoption studies show the power of parenting to be greatly overrated. Parents have a big effect on religious labels, but little on religious attitudes and behavior. Parents strongly affect which religion their children say they belong to. A major study of over 7,000 adult Australian twins finds that identical and fraternal twins are highly and equally likely to share a religion. Precisely what you would expect if nurture mattered a lot and nature didn't matter at all. Another study of almost 2,000 women from the Virginia Twin Registry reaches a similar conclusion. Family has a big effect on religious denomination, while genes have at most a small effect. If the key to salvation is merely pronouncing the words, "I belong to religion X," these are nurture effects of infinite importance. If you're raised by a family of believers, you'll probably be saved. If you're not, you'll probably be damned. Whatever your religion, though, I bet you hold to higher standards. As the book of James asks, "What good is it, my brothers, if a man claims to have faith but has no deeds? Faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." Almost all religions have detailed lists of doctrinal and behavioral do's and don'ts that separate the faithful from the hypocrites. Catholics are supposed to attend Mass on Sundays and holidays, fast on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, delay sex until marriage, oppose abortion, believe in transubstantiation, and confess their sins at least once per year. When we call a person religious, we usually mean that he takes his religion's do's and don'ts seriously. Twin and adoption research reveals surprisingly little parental influence on how truly religious children grow up to be. One early study of almost 2,000 adult Minnesota twins reared together and apart found little or no effect of parenting on religiosity. Researchers measured the twins' interest in both religious activities, such as attending services, volunteering, and religious study, and religious occupations, such as being a minister, priest, rabbi, missionary, or religious writer. Identical twins were much more similar on both measures than fraternal twins. Nurture effects were small for religious activities and zero for religious occupations. A recent follow-up found similar results. Another team of researchers looked at the religiosity of over 11,000 adult twins from Virginia. Parents have almost no effect on adult church attendance. Suppose your adopted parents attend church more than 80% of adults. When you grow up, we should expect you to attend church more often than 51% of us. The researchers also measured the Virginia twins' affinity for the religious rite. They found a very small nurture effect for men and none for women. Another major study of American and Australian church attendance looked at over 5,000 families with twins in each country. Parents in both countries have zero effect on the church attendance of their adult sons, and at most a tiny effect on the church attendance of their adult daughters. A different team of researchers created a test to measure the centrality of religion in the individual's life. The test covers the frequency of church attendance, prayer, scripture reading, religious discussion, religious moralizing, and religious holiday observance. Membership in religious groups, having friends with similar beliefs, and the importance of religious faith in daily life. When over 500 male Minnesota twins in their early 30s took the test, upbringing had only a modest effect. If you're more religious than 4 out of 5 people, expect your adopted sibling to be more religious than 56%. When about 600 female Minnesota twins took the same test, once when they were 20, then again when they were 25, though the nurture effect was larger. The source of the discrepancy was apparently age, not gender. The effect of upbringing was large for 20-year-old women, weaker for 25-year-old women, and weakest of all for 30-something men. Parents have a big effect on political labels, but little on political attitudes and behavior. Modern American politics looks a lot like religion. People split into right-thinking camps and demonize rivals as stupid and/or evil. The splits usually run along family lines. Democratic parents tend to have Democratic children. Republican parents tend to have Republican children. Religion probably remains touchier than politics. Your parents are more likely to disown you for rejecting their church than rejecting their party. Still, parents want their kids to share their political values and try to pass them on. Twin studies confirm that politics is a lot like religion. Parents have a large effect on your political label. In the Virginia 30,000 study, both identical and fraternal twins were highly and almost equally likely to belong to the same political party, implying large effects of nurture and weak effects of nature. Party identification works the same way in Australia. Fraternal twins are highly similar, and identical twins are only slightly more alike. In politics as in religion, however, the biggest nurture effects are also the most superficial. The Virginia 30,000 study found that parents have little effect on the strength of your partisan commitment, whether you always vote for the same party or straddle the fence. A national survey of young American adult twins found that parents have little influence over whether people bother to vote or participate in other political activities. If you're more politically active than 80% of people, expect your adopted sibling to be more active than 56%. The same goes for overall political philosophy and positions on specific issues. Parents may slightly affect how conservative you are, or your views on immigration, abortion, socialism, or crime, but not much. Parents have little effect on traditionalism and modernism. Old-fashioned parents raise children to be practical, respect authority, and value tradition. New Age parents raise children to be creative, question authority, and value diversity. Of course, even bohemians overstate their openness. The parent who says, question authority, usually means question their authority, not question my authority. Whether you're old school or progressive, you have a mental picture of how your kids ought to turn out and try to make it happen. When people compare traditional to modern parenting, they usually argue that one is better. I'm asking a separate question. Do parents' efforts to instill a traditional or modern outlook succeed? To get an answer, we need to measure people's traditionalism. Once again, personality psychologists are here to help. Personality psychologists have spent decades studying the trait they call openness. Open is the opposite of old-fashioned. People high in openness see themselves as creative, interesting, tolerant, curious, and artistic. People low in openness see themselves as practical, normal, upright, respectful, and down to earth. When people are less open than us, they seem square. When they're more open than us, they seem weird. The long-running cartoon King of the Hill is a fine depiction of the conflict. Hank Hill is a practical, old-fashioned Texas propane salesman who endures habitual embarrassment at the hands of his artistic, unconventional son, Bobby. In the classic episode Rodeo Days, Hank encourages his son to ride in the local rodeo, but Bobby decides, to his father's horror, to be a rodeo clown instead. Like other personality traits, openness is largely unresponsive to upbringing. Diverse twin studies find little or no effect of nurture on openness, including studies of over 1,000 Swedes raised apart and together, almost 2,000 Germans, about 1,600 American high school juniors, and 500 Canadians. The average adoption study finds a small but reliable effect of parenting on openness. Suppose two parents have a mixed family with both biological and adopted children. If the parents are more open than 80% of the population, we should expect their biological children to be more open than 56% of their peers versus 52% for adoptees. Family values. You probably think your love life is a private matter. But even if your parents officially believe in minding their own business, they probably involve themselves every step of the way. When children are young, parents frantically try to control the flow of sexual information. Some practice blanket censorship, some tell lies about storks, others make sure their kids hear it from them first. Once they've got teenagers, almost all parents want their kids to go slow. But some virtually lock them up, while others hand out condoms. By the time they're in their 20s, parents are pressuring their kids to marry and vetting the candidates. Soon after the wedding, parents start asking about grandchildren. If you contemplate divorce, your parents will probably eagerly share their opinion on that too. Parents clearly try to control their children's love lives, but how much influence do they really have? Counterexamples are easy to spot. Boys raised in puritanical homes sneak internet porn. Girls with purity rings get pregnant out of wedlock. Yet despite these counterexamples, our sexual, marital, and reproductive behavior tends to resemble our parents, or at least the behavior of our parents when they were our age. The question is not whether people resemble their parents, but why. How much is due to upbringing and how much to heredity? Parents have moderate influence over when their daughters start having sex, but little over their sons. There are two major Australian twin studies of sexual initiation. The first included over 3,000 women born between 1922 and 1965. A follow-up roughly doubled the sample size by adding older and younger female twins. Both studies found moderate to large nurture effects. If you waited longer than 4 girls out of 5, the first study found that you could expect your adopted sister to wait longer than 58% of girls. The second study, longer than 65%. Another research team used the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth to study the sexual initiation of about 2,000 American twins, siblings, half-siblings, and cousins. For women, upbringing had as much effect in the United States as it did in Australia. In contrast, parental influence on sons' sexual initiation is weak. The first of the Australian twin studies included about 1,800 males. While it found a moderate nurture effect for the older men, born 1922, 1952, it found zero parental influence for the younger men, born 1952, 1965. The NLSY study similarly found only a small nurture effect for American men born between 1958 and 1965. If you waited longer than 80% of boys, the NLSY study estimated that your adopted brother would wait longer than 53%. Parents have little or no effect on teen pregnancy. The fact that parents affect their daughters' sex lives more than their sons is not surprising. Girls' parents are more likely to take extreme measures due to fear of teen pregnancy. Their precautions largely fail. While the Australian study of almost 7,000 female twins found that parents had a moderate effect on the pregnancy of teens born between 1964 and 1971, parents had zero effect on the pregnancy of teens born between 1893 and 1964. A study of about 2,000 female Swedish twins born in the 50s also found zero effect of upbringing on teen pregnancy. Parents have little or no effect on adult sexual behavior. Few parents want their children to be 40-year-old virgins. Less than a third of Americans believe that premarital sex is always wrong. Still, this doesn't mean that anything goes. Parents try to instill values about proper sexual behavior and hope these values last a lifetime. They hope in vain. 2 major twin studies find little effect of upbringing on adult sexuality. The first surveyed nearly 5,000 Australian twins about their sociosexuality, better known as promiscuity. The survey had questions about sexual attitudes, such as sex without love is okay, and the thought of an illicit sex affair excites me, as well as sexual behavior, such as, with how many partners of the opposite sex have you had sexual intercourse within the past year? And with how many partners of the opposite sex have you had sexual intercourse on one and only one occasion? Family environment had almost no effect on sociosexuality. If you were in the 80th percentile, you could expect your adopted sibling to stand at the 51st. A second study of 1,600 female twins in the United Kingdom focused on number of sexual partners and infidelity. It found a small effect of family environment on the total number of sex partners, a moderate effect on attitudes about infidelity, and zero effect on the actual practice of infidelity. Parents may have a small effect on sexual orientation. Psychologists used to label homosexuality a mental illness caused by overprotective mothers and distant fathers. Now we tend to see sexual orientation as a preference inherent in our genes. When you look at the evidence, however, neither story quite works. Genes definitely play a strong role. Every major twin study finds that identical twins are more alike in their sexual orientation than fraternal twins. Yet genes are far from the whole story. If you're gay, your identical twin is usually still straight. Upbringing might make a difference too. In surveys, adopted brothers of gay men and adopted sisters of gay women are about 6 times as likely to be gay as the general population. This would normally be a smoking gun, but sexual orientation remains a touchy issue. The adoption results might merely show that gays with gay adopted siblings were 6 times as likely to mail in their surveys. A large Swedish twin study with an exceptionally high response rate, nearly 60%, confirms a small nurture effect for women's orientation, but none for men's. Parents have little or no effect on marriage, marital satisfaction, or divorce. In Tolstoy's novels, parents decide who their children should marry and when. In War and Peace, set during the early 1800s, parents arrange and forbid marriages without apology. In Anna Karenina, set 60 years later, parents preach respect for their children's choices, but still practice the old ways. The princess realized that in the process of getting to know each other, her daughter might fall in love with someone who did not care to marry her or who was quite unfit to be her husband. And however much it was instilled into the princess that in our times young people ought to arrange their lives for themselves, she was unable to believe it, just as she would have been unable to believe that, at any time whatever, the most suitable playthings for children 5 years old ought to be loaded pistols. Modern parents like to think they're light years from 19th century Russia. Still, we have views about who and when our children should marry, and few of us keep these views to ourselves. Even if we held our tongues, children might learn by example. Growing up in a broken home has to make kids less likely to have a happy marriage later on, right? Twin research says otherwise. A study of over 4,000 Minnesota twins, most in their 30s and 40s, found zero effect of parenting on marital status. A long-running study of almost 6,000 men from the World War II twin registry found moderate nurture effects for early marriage, but none for marital status at 30, 40, or 50. Upbringing also has little or no effect on marital satisfaction. A research team asked 1,000 female Swedish twins and their spouses about the quality of their marriages. The women's parents had no effect on the marital satisfaction of their daughters, but they did have a small effect on the marital satisfaction of their sons-in-law. You might infer that some parents raise unusually good wives, but the simpler story is that some parents are unusually good in-laws. What about divorce? An early study using the Minnesota Twin Registry found large effects of genes and no effect of family environment. Individuals with a divorced identical twin are almost 6 times as likely to be divorced. For individuals with a divorced fraternal twin, the risk of divorce less than doubles. A later study expands the sample and reaches the same conclusion. Heredity matters a lot, upbringing doesn't matter at all. One of the main reasons why divorce is heritable, the authors learned, is that marital stability depends upon personality and values, which in turn depend upon genes. Parents have little or no effect on childbearing. I often half-jokingly tell my 3 sons that they're required to have 3 kids each, but twin studies say I'm wasting my breath. While fertility runs in families, the reason nowadays is almost entirely genetic. A major study of Danish twins born in 1870-1910 found moderate nurture effects on family size. Half a century later, though, these nurture effects had disappeared. Upbringing had a tiny influence on when Danes tried to start a family, but none on the total number of children produced by those 35 to 41 years old. A different team of researchers looked at about 2,000 American twins, siblings, half-siblings, and cousins born between 1958 and 1965, and found minimal nurture effects on fertility. #7. Appreciation. To me, it's more important to deserve my children's appreciation than to get it. I would raise my children with kindness and respect, even if I knew they wouldn't reciprocate. Still, I hope they will. I want them to feel good about me and look back fondly on their childhood. The odds that my efforts pay off are pretty good. Both twin and adoption studies confirm that parents affect how their children perceive and remember them. When adoptees in the Colorado Adoption Project were 10 to 12 years old, researchers asked both biological and adopted children questions about their families. How loving, communicative, and conflict-prone were they? Siblings gave fairly similar answers whether or not they were biologically related. Suppose you rated your family more positively than 80% of kids. Expect your adopted sibling to rate your family more positively than 59% of kids. 2 research teams using the Minnesota Twin Registry reached similar conclusions. The first questioned about 1,200 Minnesota twins. How much did they like their parents? How much did their parents like them? How involved were their parents in their lives? How much did they fight with their parents? The twins answered twice, once when they were 11 years old, once when they were 14. At both ages, parents had moderate influence over how much their children liked them, and small to moderate influence over perceived involvement and conflict. Parents had less influence, though. over how much kids thought their parents liked them. A later research team doubled the number of twins in the sample to almost 2,500 and interviewed them when they were 16 to 20 years old. They confirmed that parents continue to have moderate effects on how their young adult children feel about and perceive them. When they ignore their children's wishes, parents often protest, "You'll thank me later," suggesting a disconnect between how we perceive our childhood and how we remember it. But researchers find that upbringing matters for long-term memories as well as immediate perceptions. An early Swedish study of 1,400 middle-aged and elderly twins asked them how their parents raised and treated them. Most respondents hadn't been children for 50 years, but nurture mattered. Identical twins' portraits of their parents were only moderately more alike than fraternal twins, and twins raised together gave much more similar answers than twins raised apart. The Swedish study discovered moderate nurture effects for 7 out of 8 measures of parenting style. Suppose you remember your family as more loving and harmonious than 4 out of 5 adults remember theirs. You should expect your adopted sibling to remember more familial love and harmony than 59% of adults. Other studies of German, Canadian, and Swedish twins find that parents have comparable or larger effects on how their grown children remember them. Many parents have found inspiration in the words of Forrest Whitcraft. 100 years from now, it will not matter what my bank account was, the sort of house I lived in, or the kind of car I drove. But the world may be different because I was important in the life of a child. If you have the number of years, Whitcraft has science on his side. Half a century from now, your children will remember how you treated them. If you showed them kindness, they probably won't forget. If you habitually lost your temper, they probably won't forget that either. Out of all the wishes on the parental wish list, good memories are one of the few that clearly depend upon how you raise your child. Don't forget it. Beyond the extraordinary. Parents have little long-run effect on their kids. It's an extraordinary claim, and as astronomer Carl Sagan wisely insisted, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But behavioral genetics comfortably passes Sagan's test. Over the last few decades, twin and adoption researchers cast a wide net. They looked at every major trait, and most of the minor traits, that parents seek to cultivate. They approached each of the main questions from multiple angles: different subjects, different times, different measures. The researchers come from disparate fields: medicine, psychology, economics, sociology, and more. Despite their intellectual diversity and the ambition of their project, twin and adoption researchers have built an impressively consistent body of knowledge about the causes of family resemblance. If the only lesson you take away from this book is that scientists have solid but shocking answers to the nature-nurture puzzle, I'll be happy. Behavioral geneticists have done so much great work that it's an honor just to be their messenger. But I don't want to merely deliver their message and go home. Now that we've got solid but shocking answers to the nature-nurture puzzle, it's time to tackle a deeper question. How should these answers change the way we raise our children and live our lives?